My boyfriend dumped me. I'm going back to my ex. She's the one I've always loved. I said, good luck. 3 weeks later, he called begging for another chance after his ex dumped him, and I was already dating his best friend. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 27 years old, and 3 months ago, I got dumped in a way that should have wrecked me. Instead, it had accidentally led me to the healthiest relationship I've ever had. That wasn't obvious at the time. At the time, I was sitting on my couch on a random Tuesday night, half watching a crime show with my boyfriend, Ethan. We'd been together for a year and a half, long enough that we'd fallen into routines. Tuesday nights usually meant takeout, television, and arguing over which show to watch. Everything felt normal, right up until Ethan reached for the remote and muted the TV. The second the room went quiet, my stomach tightened. Nobody interrupts a show to say something good. He rubbed his palms together, stared at the coffee table, then finally said, Claire, we need to talk. There are certain phrases that instantly age you 5 years. That was one of them. I set my drink down and waited. Ethan looked nervous, but not the kind of nervous that comes from uncertainty. This looked more like someone rehearsing a speech he'd already decided to give. I've been trying to figure out how to say this. I didn't respond. When people start with that line, they're usually not trying to protect you. They're trying to make themselves feel better about whatever they're about to do. After a few uncomfortable seconds, he finally got to the point. I never really got closure with Olivia. There it was, Olivia, his ex-girlfriend. The woman who somehow still managed to occupy space in our relationship long after she was supposedly gone. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the signs. There were plenty of them. The way he'd become oddly quiet whenever someone mentioned her name. The old photos I'd once caught him scrolling through before quickly locking his phone. The strange defensiveness whenever I casually asked about their history. At the time, I convinced myself those things didn't mean anything. Sitting on that couch, I realized they probably meant everything. Ethan kept talking. I've been thinking about her a lot lately. I folded my arms and listened. The crazy part is that I wasn't shocked. Hearing it out loud hurt, but it didn't surprise me. Deep down, I think I'd been preparing for this conversation for months without admitting it to myself. Then he said the part that mattered. I'm going back to her. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not dramatic movie smaller. Actually smaller. Like the air had gotten heavier. Ethan continued explaining himself. Something about following his heart. Something about honesty. Something about unfinished feelings. Most of it blurred together. One sentence didn't. She's the one I've always loved. Always. That word landed harder than everything else. Always meant our entire relationship had existed under the shadow of someone else. 18 months. Birthdays. Weekend trips. Meeting families. Talking about future plans. Apparently, all of it had happened while part of him was still facing backward. I stared at him for the few seconds. Then I surprised both of us. Okay. Ethan blinked. Okay? Yeah. I nodded once. Good luck. His reaction was immediate. Confusion first. Then disappointment. Then irritation. It was almost as if he'd expected a completely different scene. That's it? What else would I say? I don't know. His voice sharpened slightly. I thought you'd fight for us. The irony was unbelievable. He had just told me he'd always loved another woman, and somehow I was being criticized for accepting the information. I leaned back against the couch. Fight for what exactly? What do you mean? You literally told me you've been in love with someone else this entire time. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. His jaw tightened. For the first time that night, guilt started disappearing from his face. Annoyance replaced it. Wow. I couldn't help staring at him. You're seriously doing this? Doing what? Acting like none of this matters. A short laugh escaped before I could stop it. That wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was disbelief. You leave me for another woman and somehow I'm the bad guy because I'm not begging you to stay? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence told me I was right. A few minutes later, he grabbed his jacket and keys. At the door, he hesitated long enough that it became obvious he was waiting for me to stop him. Maybe he wanted one final emotional speech. Maybe he wanted proof that he was difficult to leave. Maybe he wanted reassurance that he mattered. Whatever he was waiting for, it never came. I stayed exactly where I was. Eventually, he walked out and slammed the door behind him. The apartment became quiet again. I sat there staring at the empty cushion beside me. Oddly enough, heartbreak wasn't the first thing I felt. Relief was. Not complete relief. Not happiness. Just the strange release that comes when a question you've been avoiding finally gets answered. Suddenly, every confusing moment from the last year made sense. Every distant mood. Every weird argument. Every time he seemed physically present but mentally somewhere else. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering anymore. I knew. A text notification broke the silence. I glanced down at my phone, then blinked. The message was from Noah Carter. Ethan's best friend, or at least he had been. Noah and I had always gotten along unusually well. Ethan used to joke about it sometimes, though there were moments when it didn't feel entirely like a joke. The message was simple. Hey, I heard what happened. Are you okay? I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I didn't know how to answer, because seeing his name made me feel unexpectedly better. Noah wasn't the kind of person who forced conversations. He didn't pry. He didn't offer fake motivational speeches. He just showed up when people needed him. Finally, I typed back, I'm okay, or at least I will be. The response came almost immediately. That's a very specific answer. Despite everything, the corner of my mouth twitched. He left. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. I could practically see Noah trying to figure out the right thing to say. Eventually, his reply arrived. I know. Ethan called me. That caught my attention. Apparently, Ethan had informed his friends about his romantic reunion before he had even finished ending our relationship. Somehow that bothered me more than it should have. A few seconds later, another message appeared. Want company? I have Thai food. And enough wine to qualify as poor decision-making. I stared at the screen. Normally, I would have said no. I've never been the type to lean on people when things fall apart. My usual strategy involves isolation, bad television, and pretending I'm fine until it becomes true. But tonight felt different. Maybe because the breakup itself wasn't the painful part. The painful part was realizing how much effort I'd spent trying to hold together something that was already broken. Before I could talk myself out of it, I typed 2 words. Come over. 45 minutes later, Noah arrived carrying 2 bags of Thai food and 2 bottles of wine. I pointed at the second bottle. Planning for disaster? Planning for realism. He set everything on the counter. Besides, if your ex just left you for the woman he's apparently been emotionally obsessed with for years, 1 bottle felt optimistic. That finally broke through the tension and caught me off guard. The first one of the night. For the next 2 hours, we sat at my kitchen table eating noodles straight from takeout containers and talking about everything except Ethan. Work, travel, movies, embarrassing childhood stories, the worst dates we'd ever been on. At one point, Noah spent 10 minutes describing a woman who brought her mother to a first date without warning. By the time I stopped laughing, my stomach hurt. It wasn't until later that the conversation finally shifted. Noah leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. You know this wasn't about you, right? The question caught me off guard. I looked down at my wine glass. I know that's what people say. No. His voice was calm but firm. I mean it. Something about the certainty in his tone made me look up. Ethan's been stuck on Olivia for years. I noticed the regret on his face almost immediately. He probably hadn't meant to say that out loud. But now that he had, neither of us could pretend otherwise. Years. He nodded slowly. Claire, everybody saw it. That stung. Not because I was angry. Because I suddenly wondered how many people had noticed something I missed. Noah rested his forearms on the table. You weren't a replacement. Then what was I? His answer came without hesitation. The healthiest relationship he ever had. I looked away. Part of me appreciated hearing it. Another part hated that it didn't matter. If that was true, why wasn't it enough? Noah thought about the question before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Because sometimes people get attached to a version of the past that doesn't actually exist anymore. The words stayed with me long after he left that night. They followed me into bed. They stayed with me the next morning. And they echoed through my head when I woke up to 18 notifications and discovered Ethan had already made his reunion with Olivia Instagram official. The photo showed them holding hands, smiling like they were starring in a romantic comedy. The caption made me physically cringe. Sometimes true love finds its way back home. I stared at it for several seconds, then immediately sent the screenshot to Noah. His response arrived less than a minute later. That might be the most embarrassing caption I've seen all year. And somehow, against all logic, that made me feel a little better. By noon, Ethan had apparently decided enough time had passed for him to start acting like we were 2 mature adults who had simply chosen different paths in life. My phone lit up with a text from him. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at it while sitting at my desk. The timing alone was incredible. Less than 24 hours earlier, he'd left me for another woman. By morning, he'd announced their reunion online. Now he was checking in as if we'd broken up over scheduling conflicts. I didn't answer. An hour later, another message arrived. I know this is probably hard for you. Still nothing. Then came the third. I hope eventually we can stay friends. That one almost made me choke on my coffee. Friends. People always seem to want friendship after they've detonated a relationship. It's like they're hoping a softer label will somehow erase the damage. I blocked his number and went back to work. For about 48 hours, life was surprisingly peaceful. Then Friday happened. I was finishing up some reports when Noah called. The second I answered, I could hear something strange in his voice. Not concern. Not anger. Amusement. The kind that usually means someone else has done something ridiculous. You can't start a phone call sounding like that and not explain yourself. Fair point, he said. Just promise you won't laugh too hard. That's not encouraging. It shouldn't be. I heard him exhale. Olivia spent 30 minutes yelling at me today. I pushed my chair back. What? Apparently Ethan won't stop talking about you. That wasn't remotely what I expected. I sat there trying to process it. What does that even mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. Noah paused. According to Olivia, every conversation somehow circles back to you. That made no sense. Ethan had gotten exactly what he wanted. The woman he'd supposedly always loved. The relationship he'd walked away from me to pursue. Why would I still be part of those conversations? She asked him if he was over you. And? He got defensive. The answer sat awkwardly between us. Noah wasn't trying to make me feel better. If anything, he sounded confused. So was I. When we hung up, I spent the rest of the afternoon wondering what was actually happening over there. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. If Ethan was genuinely happy, my name shouldn't have been coming up at all. A week passed. Then another. I never heard directly from Ethan, but somehow he remained present anyway. Mutual friends mentioned running into him. Someone casually told me he'd asked how I was doing. Another friend mentioned he'd brought me up during drinks. Then someone else said the same thing. Individually, those conversations meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. And the pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, Noah kept becoming a larger part of my life. Not through some dramatic romantic montage. It happened naturally. Coffee before work. Dinner after work. Saturday afternoon walks. Random phone calls. Sharing stupid memes. The kind of connection that sneaks up on you because nobody's forcing it. One evening, we were sitting outside a small restaurant overlooking the river. The weather was perfect, and the city lights reflected off the water in long ribbons of gold and white. Halfway through dinner, I realized something. I hadn't thought about Ethan all day. Not once. The realization caught me off guard. Noah noticed immediately. What? I shook my head. Nothing. That's never true. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I was just thinking how weird this is. What is? How much easier everything feels. He understood immediately. There was no need to explain. For a while, we sat quietly watching boats move through the water. Eventually, I said, "You know what's embarrassing?" Probably several things. I spent most of my relationship trying to become whatever version of myself Ethan needed. Noah looked over. I continued. If he was upset, I adjusted. If he was distant, I gave him space. If he was frustrated, I tried harder. Looking back, it feels exhausting. It sounds exhausting. It was. He nodded slowly. Relationships aren't supposed to feel like you're constantly taking an exam. That line stayed with me, because it was true. With Noah, I never felt like I was being evaluated. I never felt like I was competing with someone from his past. I never felt like I had to earn basic affection. The contrast became impossible to ignore. A few days later, I found myself noticing other things too. The way Noah listened when I talked. The way he remembered details. The way he never looked distracted when we were together. Little things. Normal things. The kind of things I should have considered normal all along. One morning, we were grabbing coffee before work when he set his cup down and looked at me. I have a question. That immediately made me suspicious. Why do you sound nervous? Because I am. I blinked. Noah Carter was not a nervous person. What question? He rubbed the back of his neck. I know we've basically been spending all our free time together. I waited. And I know this probably sounds ridiculous. Still waiting. But I'd like to take you on an actual date. The second the words left his mouth, he groaned. That sounded better when I practiced it in my car. I stared at him. You practiced asking me out? 3 times. That's actually adorable. Please don't make this worse. The expression on my face must have been entertaining because he immediately laughed at himself. That came out worse than I planned. A little. I had a much better version in my head. I figured. He pointed at me. Don't make fun of me. I'm trying to be charming. You're failing. That's devastating. Neither of us seemed to know what to say next. Then I asked the obvious question. What exactly have the last 3 weeks been? He thought about it. Unofficial practice? The absurdity of it was impossible to ignore. That answer won. Okay. His eyebrows lifted. Okay? Yeah. I picked up my coffee. You can take me on a date. The grin that appeared on his face was worth making him work for the answer. Good. What? I was running out of ways to accidentally spend time with you. That date happened 3 nights later. Then another one happened 2 days after that. Then another. Everything felt effortless. Not perfect. Effortless. There's a difference. Perfect doesn't exist. Effortless means you aren't constantly wondering where you stand. Then something happened that pushed the entire situation into chaos again. I woke up one Saturday morning to 3 missed calls from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored them. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. A voicemail had been left. I pressed play. The second I heard the voice, I sat upright. It was Olivia, Ethan's ex, or technically, Ethan's current girlfriend. At least as far as I knew. Claire, I know this is weird, but I think we need to talk. That was it. No explanation. No context. Just one sentence. I listened to it twice. Then immediately called Noah. He answered on the second ring. Good morning. Olivia just called me. A pause. What? Exactly. What did she want? I have no idea. The strange thing was that she didn't sound angry. If anything, she sounded tired. The voicemail lingered in the back of my mind all day. By evening, I still didn't know what to make of it. Then the answer arrived from a completely different direction. Noah and I were having dinner when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and immediately looked uncomfortable. What happened? He turned the phone toward me. The message was from Ethan. Just one line. Can we talk? I think I messed up. I stared at the screen, then looked at Noah. Neither of us needed to say it out loud. The reunion was falling apart. The relationship Ethan had walked away for was already cracking. And based on that text, it sounded like the damage was a lot worse than anyone realized. The text sat on Noah's screen while neither of us touched our food. A week earlier, Ethan had been posting soulmate captions and relationship photos like he'd just won the lottery. Now he was texting his best friend saying he'd messed up. The speed alone was almost impressive. Noah locked his phone and set it face down on the table. I'll give him credit for one thing. What? At least he's finally figuring it out. I wasn't nearly as confident. People don't usually destroy a 1.5-year relationship, run back to an ex, and suddenly become self-aware in under a month. Most of the time, they just find new ways to justify their decisions. The next few days answered that question for us. Apparently, Ethan and Olivia had lasted exactly 17 days. I learned that on a Wednesday afternoon while pretending to pay attention during a meeting at work. My phone buzzed 3 times. The first message came from Noah. You're going to enjoy this. The second arrived before I opened the first. Actually, maybe enjoy isn't the right word. The third contained a screenshot. Every photo of Ethan and Olivia had disappeared. Every soulmate caption. Every romantic post. Everything. Gone. As if their grand reunion had never happened. I immediately texted Noah. How long? His response arrived almost instantly. 17 days. I stared at the screen. 17. 18 months with me. 17 days with the woman he'd supposedly never stopped loving. The whole thing would have been funny if it weren't so absurd. That night, Noah stopped by my apartment with takeout, which had quietly become a recurring theme in our lives. While unpacking containers on my kitchen counter, he said, I talked to Jake. Jake was one of Ethan's closest friends. What happened? Exactly what everyone expected. I grabbed a drink and leaned against the counter. Meaning? Noah shook his head. Both of them walked into that reunion expecting old feelings to magically solve new problems. Instead, they discovered they had become different people. That explained more than either of them probably wanted to admit. People change. That's what nobody talks about when they romanticize old relationships. Time doesn't freeze people in place. People rarely miss who someone is now. Most of the time, they miss who they used to be. Reality rarely matches the fantasy. Noah continued. According to Jake, most of their arguments somehow involved you. That caught me off guard. Me? He nodded. Ethan kept comparing things. What kind of things? The way you'd handle situations. The way you'd react to problems. The way you'd communicate. I stared at him. You've got to be kidding. I wish I was. The irony was unbelievable. He spent 18 months comparing me to Olivia, then spent 17 days comparing Olivia to me. Neither of us said much after that. There wasn't really anything left to say. A few days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. Normally, I ignore unknown numbers. For some reason, I answered. Hello? The response came immediately. Claire? I recognized Ethan's voice before he finished saying my name. I closed my eyes. Of course. What do you want? His confidence was gone. The difference was obvious instantly. The man who left my apartment a few weeks earlier sounded completely different from the man currently holding this conversation. I was hoping we could talk. We are talking. You know what I mean. Unfortunately, I did. And I also knew exactly where this was heading. Ethan, just hear me out. I leaned against my car in the parking garage and waited. He took that as permission. I made a mistake. There it was. The sentence everyone had predicted. The sentence I knew would eventually arrive. Just not this quickly. I thought getting back together with Olivia would fix everything. I remained silent. Not to be dramatic. I genuinely didn't know what response he expected. I thought those feelings meant something. And now? The question slipped out before I could stop it. A long exhale came through the phone. Now I realize I threw away something good. Something. Interesting choice of word. Not someone. Something. I noticed that immediately. You didn't throw away something, Ethan. He didn't respond. You threw away a person. The silence on the line felt different after that. Less rehearsed. More uncomfortable. Eventually, he said, "I miss you." I looked up at the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. Months earlier, hearing those words would have changed my entire day. Now they barely move the needle. "I think you miss certainty." What does that mean? It means life didn't go the way you expected. That's not fair. No, fair would have been ending things honestly before you started planning a future with someone else. That landed. I could tell. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't defend himself. Eventually, he asked the question that had clearly been sitting in his head the entire time. "Are you with Noah?" There it was. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because the question finally explained everything. This wasn't just about Olivia. It wasn't just about regret. Part of this was Noah. Part of this was watching someone else step into a place Ethan assumed would remain empty. Yes. The answer came easily. Another stretch of silence followed. Then, that was fast. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it in disbelief. The lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. "You left me for Olivia." "I know, but..." "No." I cut him off. "You don't get to complain about timing after literally leaving me for another woman." He had no response, because there wasn't one. The conversation ended a few minutes later. No dramatic closure, no breakthrough, no reconciliation, just reality. And reality wasn't giving him the answer he wanted. Afterward, I called Noah. He answered immediately. "Everything okay?" Guess who asked for another chance? A groan came through the phone. "You're kidding." "I wish." "Please tell me you laughed in his face." "I was more polite than that." "You've always been too nice." "According to you." "According to reality." That conversation should have been the end of the story. It wasn't, because Ethan didn't stop. At first, it was indirect. Mutual friends mentioned he'd been asking questions. Then more friends mentioned the same thing. Eventually, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Everywhere Ethan went, he was apparently trying to gather information. Were Noah and I serious? How often did we see each other? Had Noah always liked me? Were we moving too fast? It would have been annoying if it weren't so transparent. The answer he wanted wasn't information. The answer he wanted was reassurance. Reassurance that Noah and I wouldn't last. Reassurance that he still had a chance. Unfortunately for him, life kept moving in the opposite direction. The more time Noah and I spent together, the stronger the relationship became. Not because of dramatic romantic moments, because of consistency. The little things. The daily things. The things that actually matter. One evening, we sat on Noah's balcony sharing takeout while the city lights flickered below us. At some point, I caught myself thinking about how peaceful everything felt. No uncertainty. No comparison. No wondering where I stood. Just peace. The realization hit me unexpectedly. For so long, I'd assumed relationships were supposed to be difficult. That constant emotional work was normal. That love meant proving yourself over and over. Now I understood something I wish I'd learned years earlier. The right relationship still takes effort, but it doesn't make you feel like you're competing against someone's past. About a week later, another unexpected message arrived. This time it came from Olivia. The same Olivia who had called me weeks earlier. The message started with an apology, then another, then a surprisingly honest explanation. According to her, Ethan had spent most of their reunion talking about the past. At first, she'd assumed he meant their past together. Eventually, she realized he was talking about me almost as often. Places I'd gone with him, conversations we'd had, things I used to say. The more she described it, the more uncomfortable I felt. Not because I was jealous, because it sounded exhausting. One sentence stood out from the rest. "I think he was more attached to the idea of happiness than the people standing in front of him." I read that line twice. Then a third time, because the more I thought about it, the more accurate it seemed. Olivia ended by apologizing again. Not for dating him. Not for the breakup. For not understanding the situation sooner. I never replied. There wasn't really anything left to discuss. The story was already ending. Neither of us had realized it yet. The final chapter arrived a week later. Noah and I were having dinner at a small restaurant near the river when a familiar voice appeared behind us. "Claire." I turned. Ethan stood beside the table looking exhausted. Not heartbroken. Not angry. Just tired. Like someone who had spent weeks arguing with reality and finally realized reality wasn't changing its mind. Noah slowly set down his fork. I looked from one man to the other, then back at Ethan. Ethan shifted his weight awkwardly beside the table. "Can we talk?" Noah glanced at me but stayed quiet. He wasn't trying to answer for me. He was giving me the choice. A month ago, that would have mattered more than I could explain. Now it simply felt normal. I looked up at Ethan. "We are talking." His expression tightened. "Claire, I know I don't deserve another chance." That was probably the first honest thing he'd said all night. "I know I hurt you." I didn't answer. The restaurant buzzed around us. Plates clattered. Someone laughed near the bar. Life kept moving, while Ethan stood there looking like a man who had finally caught up with his own decisions. "I thought I knew what I wanted," he continued. "And now? His shoulders dropped. Now I know I was wrong. Part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered sitting alone on my couch while he walked out to chase someone else. I remembered the Instagram post. I remembered him asking if we could still be friends. And whatever sympathy had appeared disappeared just as quickly. You didn't lose me tonight, Ethan. His eyes met mine. You lost me the night you left. Neither of us looked away. Eventually he nodded, slowly, like he already knew that was true. Then his gaze shifted toward Noah. I guess I should have seen this coming. Noah leaned back in his chair. No, you should have appreciated what you had. Ethan looked down at the table for a moment. There wasn't really anything left to argue with. That was the problem with the truth. Once it arrived, it didn't leave much room for debate. The answer wasn't cruel, which somehow made it hit harder. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ethan let out a breath and gave a small nod. Fair enough. That was it. No dramatic speech. No argument. No begging. Just acceptance. A few moments later, he turned and walked toward the exit. This time he didn't stop. Didn't look back. Didn't wait for me to change my mind. When the door closed behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Closure. Noah picked up his fork. So, I laughed. So? Can we finally eat before this food gets cold? For the first time that night, neither of us felt the need to talk about Ethan anymore. As the conversation drifted back to normal things, I found myself thinking about how different life looked from where I'd been standing a few weeks earlier. A few weeks earlier, I thought Ethan leaving would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. Sitting across from Noah that night, watching him steal fries from my plate while pretending he wasn't doing it, I realized how wrong I'd been. Ethan came back. I just didn't need him anymore.